The following is an excerpt from the book Experiences of Thought by Anthony Kahn, available now on Amazon.com and Kindle. Outside the box, Opus Dei. If, as has been suggested in the last two sections, the universe is ultimately an intertwining of consciousness and information at the most fundamental level, then where does that leave us insofar as a first cause? Is there need of a God? If so, then who or what exactly is God? By its very definition, that which is fundamental has no preceding cause but rather exists intrinsically in its own right. Furthermore, by logical extension, all that which is not fundamental has come into existence subsequently as a consequence of that which is fundamental. If the union of consciousness and information is indeed the most fundamental form of the universe, then we need look no further in our search for God. But what exactly does this mean? What is the form of God? What is the nature of God? Many people the world over are programmed to envisage God as an anthropomorphic figure, seated upon cloud and cloaked in power and purity, an ancient and wise figure from whom all evil flees in terror. Religion has certainly shaped this view, but ultimately, how can we expect to perceive God as anything other than a grand being of our own form? And yet, perhaps there is truth in this view. Perhaps God is indeed similar in form to ourselves. But what is our own form? Are we talking about our physical form? A head atop a torso with arms and legs? As has been one of the overarching messages of this chapter, in our most fundamental form, it is much more apt to think of ourselves as a subjective universe of experience and thought, within which all that we know exists. Our entire world is simply experiences of thought, and so in turn, are we. So perhaps then this is in fact the form of God. We interpret God in the way that we tend to naturally interpret ourselves, as physical beings that move around inside an expanse of time and space. But perhaps we should instead interpret both God and ourselves as fundamentally experiences of thought, the container of time and space and the material universe. But what is the difference between us and God? Is God simply a perfect, all-powerful version of ourselves that thought us into being? There are actually a number of ways that we could potentially envisage the Creator, given the model that we have been formulating throughout this chapter. We have essentially structured the entirety of existence as a network of minds, each a bubble of conscious experience and thought that perceives other minds as information that is subsequently interpreted to become part of its own world. If we evolve this system, we end up with minds that are increasingly overlapping and intertwining as they grow in content and understanding. What happens, though, on the more advanced end of the evolutionary scale? What would we see if we could somehow examine the full scope of two highly evolved minds? Arguably, the two minds would come to overlap to such an extent that although they be separate instances of consciousness, they nevertheless understand things in exactly the same way and see things in exactly the same way. Furthermore, the way they see things and understand things would be inherently accurate and logically sound given their enormous breadth of experience. This same breadth of experience and understanding would also make them empathetic and intrinsically kind. In summary, they would begin to appear as beings of perfection, united in purpose, beings of godlike proportions. Could that which we might call God, the first cause, actually be one and the same as the network of minds that we had labeled in section 5.8 as the multiverse of experience, and in section 5.12 as the coin at the bottom of the well? Could God be the same entity as the universe itself, as promulgated by pantheism, a self-perpetuating awareness at whose center lies countless evolved beings of perfection and power, who act as one and whom we shall all come to join as we are gradually polished by the turbulent river of life? We cannot know, of course, with any certainty, but it is interesting to speculate nonetheless. It is far from impossible that we are instead offshoots of the original primordial consciousness, and thus children of God as opposed to divine siblings. In this scenario, however, the original consciousness must pre-exist as an all-knowing being and the full and perfect embodiment of all logic without need of growth, thus rendering such evolution as described in the last section unnecessary. Whatever precise form and relationship that the first cause ultimately shares with ourselves, it is reasonable to assume from our own deepest and most intrinsic form that consciousness is key. The sovereign whose face adorns our coin at the bottom of the well is indeed conscious, and we can come to understand their nature best not by reading ancient religious texts, but by examining the nature of the world around us. Opus Dei. This completes Chapter 5. The story continues in Chapter 6, where we reflect on the nature of the ideal world.